So we're going to be covering how to build autonomous agents with Copilot Studio. So first of all, let's level set on the type of agents that we build and where autonomous agents fit in. So what you just saw Aisha demo was an example of a conversational based agent. So these conversational agents can be retrieval agents that get information from grounded data. They can reason and summarize over your data and answer questions, or they could be task based. So we could have them automate certain things and perform actions for us. But the other type of agent that we have is an autonomous agent, and these are unique in that they can operate independently. They don't need us to interact within a chat to be able to get what we need out of the agent. They can operate independently, and how does that work and kind of what's the key difference? Well, an analogy that I like to use to describe conversational versus autonomous agents is conversational agents are like using GPS in your car. You tell it where you want to go, and it will navigate accordingly, and you need to keep interacting with it to really make it useful. Autonomous agents are kind of like using a self-driving car. Once it knows its destination, it makes those decisions independently, and there's no input needed from you. So what are the building blocks then of an autonomous agent? How do they actually work behind the scenes? Well, the main thing that separates an autonomous agent from a conversational agent is the trigger. So this is what tells your agent what it should do, what should kick it off, and then it can go and perform all the actions leveraging the knowledge that you provided, whether that be public website information or information on your SharePoint sites, files that you upload. Then it can perform actions that you define as well that you want it to do, like listing devices from ServiceNow, going and actually performing steps in Power Automate via a flow. And then it uses the instructions that you provided to know exactly what to do when and what actions to use, what knowledge to use. So these are kind of the building blocks of what makes an autonomous agent autonomous, with the key really being the trigger. So these are what allow your agents to run autonomously, and they activate based off of events that are external to your agent. These are actually accessed via Power Platform connectors. So when you use a trigger in your Copilot Studio autonomous agent, that is actually a one-to-one mapping with the connectors that we have in the Power Platform ecosystem. So each connector that we have for all these different services has not only actions that you can perform with that connector, but triggers that can kick off based off of events in that data source. So we'll take a look at kind of how that relationship works when we get into the demo here, which is a really good segue over to the demo portion. Now, to walk through this, I actually have already built an autonomous agent, and I'm going to dissect what I did and how that works and how it looks different from just a normal agent. So we know we can go and build an agent in Copilot Studio here with going to the crate, going to new agent, and we have either this conversational approach where we can ask questions and answer questions back and forth, or we can skip to configure and we can build out an agent. So the process to build an autonomous agent is the exact same as far as these steps go to building a normal conversational agent that we might have. So I just went through those steps. And I'm creating an agent to help automate a piece of my new employee onboarding process. So the goal here is I'm actually using a SharePoint list to put in the names of new employees once they're ready and their email addresses and their departments. And I want this to be what kicks off my process. So once a new employee is here, that's our note that they're ready to get started. And then we need to schedule some required trainings for the employee and help to procure them a new device. So I have a few data sources here. This is what I want to be my trigger, but we also have this data source where we want to be able to point it to the devices listed here for different Microsoft Surface devices to procure. And then we also have information as well that we want to get for the meetings, which let me get that pulled up. This is just a Word doc that I'll be uploading for trainings. So it's a table, and each training has a day of the week, a cadence, duration, and then there's different trainings required for different departments. So for this, we'll see how this all kind of ties together. So just like building out a normal agent, we can scroll down here and we can add knowledge. So that's one of the first things I did was I went and uploaded that IT training document and pointed that and just uploaded that as a file that it can reference of all the trainings that they need to be able to pull from. And then I have business devices. This just points to this Microsoft Surface website here where it can browse all of the devices that we have available. So I've equipped my agent with the knowledge of the data that I want it to be able to get. And then I've also added actions. So that's another thing that we can do where we can make our agent smarter and actually work for us to do things like pull information from different databases, but also write information to databases. So one of the things I want it to do is to actually create a hardware request item. So if we look at that, this is an action, and all of these actions, again, map directly to the Power Platform connectors that we have. So I just added the create an item SharePoint connector here. And then here I can define the inputs and the outputs. So this is key when you're working with actions inside of your autonomous agents. Since we want it to run autonomously, we need to be able to rely on it handling and the inputs for here dynamically, basically by itself. So when you look at performing and adding your actions, you can do some things where you have this property here. How should this be filled out as set as value? So you might hard code, obviously, the SharePoint site and the actual list where you want to be able to write this to. But there's things that you want to fill out dynamically. So what we can do is we can click add, and this will show us all of the different columns that we have in this particular list. And we can do a mapping to tell the agent how it should fill out those individual values. So that's what you'll see is what I did here. So for the title, I chose to have this dynamically fill in with the best option. And the important thing is right here in this description. So what I'm asking it to do is fill with the manufacturer name of the device from the business devices knowledge source of Microsoft Business Devices. So I'm telling the agent how to dynamically fill this in based off of the data sources that I have. So this is what's really important, is it's going to come down to providing very clear instructions, not only in the instructions section, which I'll show you in a minute, but also here in the inputs that we want to fill dynamically. So I went and I did this same thing for all of the columns that I have in that list. So for model, I'm wanting it to fill in with the model. Cost, I'm specifying that. Description, this is another thing. We can get a little bit more fancy and not just do a one-to-one mapping. It's a multi-line of text field. So I can say fill this with additional details such as RAM, hard drive, screen size, and things like that. And then our recipients, this is where I'm actually asking it to fill with the name of the user from the trigger. So notice when I'm referencing these two, just a few tips and tricks, I'm putting in single quotes the name of either the trigger or the knowledge source or the action that I'm referencing. That just tells it a little bit more specifically where it should be getting that information from. And then I can even have it do some fun things for me. So one of the columns that we have in that list is an asset tag column. So I can have it randomly fill a 6-digit asset tag starting with the letters asset hyphen, right? And it can do that for me and create auto-generated numbers. So these are the type of things that we can do just with our descriptions and have it automatically, dynamically fill those in. So that's one action that we have, but let's go back and we'll look at another one. So you'll notice right here, I have this new onboarding training. So we can not only reference connectors, but we can go and have this execute flows for us as well. So you can create a flow, which is what I did here. So let's click on this and I'll actually open up the flow in the back end and we can see what's going on. It's a really simple one. I'm just running a flow. So when you create a flow from your agent like this, it's going to give you a trigger of run a flow from Copilot, and you can have individual parameters. So if you want to pass information from your agent, in this case, you can just map those, like your email address, the start time, and the training title, because this is for actually scheduling the training in Teams. And then I'm just going to add in the action and do and handle that scheduling. So I'm going to map and pull in that information, and it's going to create a Teams meeting invite for me automatically. And then it's going to respond back to the Copilot with any referenced information. So that's what we have here as far as the actions go. Now, the main pieces of what makes this autonomous, though, as I mentioned, is going to come down to instructions right here and the trigger. So let's look at the trigger first. So as I mentioned, we have the SharePoint list for new employees. So when something is added here, that's when I want this to kick off. So we can just simply add a trigger. We can go to all and we can search across all the thousands of different connectors that we have. For example, I know there's Salesforce ones. We could choose whatever trigger that we want from here and just configure it. Now, the kicker is when we're using a trigger, so I just went and did this for the SharePoint when an item is created connector that we have. But if we look at what's going on behind the scenes, This is actually just creating a Power Automate flow for us. So how this is handling the execution of the event is by creating a flow in Power Automate, since this already supports monitoring for events to happen in our connectors. So here's our trigger in this case with the mapping that we provided of the list and the SharePoint site. And then it's just going to wait for that to execute. It is going to have one action that sends that payload or that response back to our agent so it can finish doing what it needs to do. So the important thing right here is the body message. So this is where we're saying just use the content from the body of this when an item is created trigger, send that whole thing back to our agent so it can finish doing what it needs to do. And we can actually have, depending on what your process is, we can have multiple triggers in a single agent too, which is something that we couldn't do with a flow alone, right? So if we wanted to, as part of the process, have the when a new item is created be the initial kickoff, but then maybe we want to have another trigger for when these events are scheduled that gives a confirmation to the staff that everything has been done for that employee. That could be another trigger that we add just by going through this process again and configuring that. So this right here is really the secret sauce to making it autonomous. Now to use this, another thing I wanted to point out is we need to enable this right here. So you'll see this toggle for orchestration. So the thing that's going to enable us to be able to use a trigger and make our agents autonomous is the generative orchestration. So you do have to have that enabled. And if it's not enabled by default, it should prompt you when you go to add a trigger that you need to turn that on. So this is what's basically telling the agent that, hey, you can be able to autonomously know when to kick things off. Okay, so those are the main pieces there. The final kind of piece of the puzzle is right here, is the instructions. And this is often the hardest part to really get right, is getting thorough instructions. So you need to figure out the right way to prompt your way to detailed instructions to tell the agent what to do. So what I've done here is I usually start with, hey, what are you supposed to do? So you are to organize new employee training. This varies by department, so put in some constraints there. Based off of the user's department, you will select training from a list of available training sessions and then create Teams meetings for the new employee. You must also find a suitable device for the new employee based on the department. And then this is what I found works really well, is to tell it to use the following instructions and just put it in a bulleted kind of number format like I did of exactly what you want it to do. So when a new employee is added, use the IT training knowledge to build a list of required training. Notice again, I'm using single quotes. So anytime I'm referencing knowledge or an action that I've used, you want to scroll down and make sure you get the name that's showing up right here and putting that in single quotes so it knows which one you're referencing. Number two, I wanted to create Teams meetings for each training using the flow that we have in this case, which is the new employee onboarding. And then ensure that the meeting is created on the corresponding weekday. Again, number three, use the business knowledge, select a device. And this is another thing that I did. So I had to kind of play around with this because it wasn't doing exactly as I wanted it to. So you can do things like putting things in bold, in all caps. So you'll notice I did, you must only select the device from this knowledge source because it might try to hallucinate something like another device, not from your data source. So just as something as simple as putting that one statement there and must only in capitalization can really help tweak and make sure you get the right response out of the agent. So I just put in a little bit more detail there. And then if no suitable device is found, don't assume a device. And then finally, this is where I wanted to go and call that action to add to that create order request list that we have in SharePoint as well. And I didn't show that before, but this is it. This is the hardware list that we have where once it does go and procure the device or suggest the device that the employee needs, it will add that to this list so we can then go order it. And you'll notice some more details that I did here as far as the device, like IT employees require a high specification device, whereas sales employees require lower specification. So we can even add in that intelligence to have it dynamically make those decisions of, what specific type of devices people should get. Yeah, and I love the comment there. Yes, you need to tell your agent to pay attention. So you do have to tweak it at times. So in a nutshell, that's really the building blocks of what you need to make up a simple autonomous agent. Now let's test this out. So I'm going to go into our new employee here, and we'll add a new item. All right, so I'll just add one for me. And then for the department, let's see, I'll do something different. We'll say it's sales and we'll save. So that will kick off our Copilot here. It will take a minute to be able to have that show up. So usually up to a minute is when it polls for new events. And how we test this out, so I haven't published anything yet, but we can make sure everything is working by going to your trigger and clicking this little test button. And this is going to show all recent runs of basically new items being added. And again, can take a minute. So we'll just give it a second here to show the latest run that's going on. Keep refreshing. Can be very impatient at this point. But it will show up, and then we just select it and we click Start Testing. And that will help it get kicked off there. And the cool thing about once it does execute is we'll see a live activity feed of exactly how the agent is thinking and what it's doing. And once I'm done with this, it's just a matter of publishing. And then that flow is just sitting there in the back end to poll every minute for new items, in this case, to be added to that SharePoint list. And that will just automatically kick off the execution of our agent here. Okay. There we go. Finally there. So there's our new run that we just had. So I can select that one and we will start testing. And this second part of the process could take a minute too, as it thinks through everything and goes and gets the information. So we can tell from this conversation history that the trigger was detected. We can expand that out and we can see the full payload that in this case was passed in from the flow that we had. So here's all the details about that item that I added. And now here's that conversation, that activity history I was talking about. So it's going and it pulled my knowledge sources and it got some information, and see each of these actions. This is that flow, and it identified, in this case, it looks like 4 different training sessions I need being in the sales department. And it's going and executing that flow and scheduling the team meetings. Now I can see it thinking, and it's going and checking the knowledge sources again to get a laptop device from that website, and it's creating that hardware request. So totally hands off. I didn't do anything here, and we can see the session is complete. And if we scroll down, there we go. It even gives me a nice message letting me know that everything was done. And now I can just go check to see, did it actually work? So let's start over with in Teams here. I'll just give it a refresh and see if it scheduled those events for me. So I'll go over to my calendar. There we go. Cool. So there are all of those events that map back to that Word document for the sales. So these are all only sales related trainings that I need. So it was able to get my department from that and dynamically pull only the relevant ones for me as a new employee. And if we look at the new hardware requests, let's refresh that. And there we go. So there's everything that I wanted to do. It's suggesting that I get a Surface laptop. There's the price. There's the randomly generated asset tag. And there's the key details that I ask it to put in the description. So that's just a really simple example of what we can do with an autonomous agent. Just a few tips and tricks I want to share with you too before I let you go. One, you might be wondering, a lot of what we saw there is kind of similar to a flow, right? To a cloud flow. So why would I use a cloud flow versus an autonomous agent? So just a few things here. I'm not going to go over these exhaustively, but one is just the nature of cloud flows versus autonomous agents. Cloud flows are static, so you really have to script out every step in advance, and you have to update it manually. Whereas autonomous agents, as we just saw, are self-directed. Yeah, we have to provide it with the knowledge and the actions and some instructions, but then it can go and make those decisions. They're really adaptive. Cloud flows, on the other hand, are deterministic. They have to have really predictable steps. So that's what makes cloud flows good for straightforward processes. If you need routine approval processes, say document routing with minimal edge cases, those are still really good use cases for a cloud flow. Things where you have frequent, repeatable steps, and limited kind of outputs with that, cloud flows are still going to be the way to go. But if you need something like we just saw where, hey, based off of the department, I need to go and find the right device and have different specifications for that, that's a really good use case because of the adaptive nature, and they can support those on-the-fly classification and routings and different levels of certainty. So last thing I want to share with you all is some quick tips. One, this is still very, very new. So my suggestion for you all, if you want to get your hands on this, is to start simple. Think of the most simple use case that you have, try it out, and go from there, and then iterate and test. Each time that you add an action, test to see if it's working. What's it doing? Each time that you change the instructions, test. Just start small and then keep growing and test along the way. The other, if an action isn't working, so if, say, you go try to add the Salesforce action to do something, but it's just not doing what you want it to, you can try wrapping that in a flow. So sometimes an action just might be a little wonky. Again, this is very, very new technology. So you can find better results just wrapping that in a flow and calling it like I did to add those Teams calendar invites. And finally, as I mentioned, the instructions are the most difficult part to get right, and small changes can have a big impact. So before you go completely reconfiguring everything, just try some small tweaks to your instructions, retest, and try that a few times to see what kind of results you can get. So those are my tips for success. There's not a lot of content right now on autonomous agents as it is so new. We're looking forward to creating more instructions, some like great stuff like Aicha and team have created with their Copilot Camp. We want to create equivalent for Copilot Studio and autonomous agents. So be on the lookout for that. But in the meantime, I have a video on the community learning channel that has another kind of scenario as well that walks through this that you can reference. So that's all I had. Thank you so much.